The broadcast
All
is
right.
we're on.
Looks like we're live. I hope the notification here is true. But hi, Stephanie. Thank you for joining us today. I know we still have a minute to go, so we'll probably just welcome people. Um, hey, everyone. If you're already tuned in, please just drop a note on a comment. Just let us know where you're joining us from. We're expecting people, I think, from at least 3 different continents today.
Wow.
So it's truly global. Yeah, so please let us know where you're joining from. Let me make sure I can actually see the comments. Stephanie, where are you joining us from today?
From Reedsville in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. When I'm saying the middle of nowhere, you would have to get lost driving to find us. That's how it is, really long. Yeah, yeah. Where it is not raining like in India.
Yeah, I'm actually joining in from Bangalore, India. It's been raining at least thrice a week here. It's been beautiful, actually. The rest of the country is pretty hot right now, middle of summer, but Bangalore, surprisingly, it's been pretty good in terms of the weather. So,
The Garden City. Yeah.
yeah. Let's see. All right. While more people are tuning in, since we've gotten started, let's dive in, Stephanie. So I'll do a quick introduction, Stephanie. Honestly, the amount of experience that you bring in and the amount of things you've done over the years, I don't even know if I can do a good job introing you. But for those of you, that are just tuning in, Stephanie is the president and principal consultant at Going Global LLC. She's also worked at Thomas Jefferson University, Carnegie Mellon, Princeton, University of Chicago, and plenty of other places. And she's really an absolute expert as far as international community engagement is concerned. And I'm super thrilled to have you on board, Stephanie. Thank you
Likewise.
for joining us.
Look, it's an honor. It really is. It truly is.
Yeah. So let's actually dive right in, and just to sort of set the context for the format of this discussion for everyone, we're going to try and keep it as short as possible, as actionable as possible. We're going to cut the fluff out. We're going to keep it to under 30 minutes. And we're going to try and make this as useful as possible for everybody who's tuning in today, right? Um, so Stephanie, give us your story. How did you get into international community engagement?
Totally by chance, really. Before I worked for a university, I worked for Rotary International, where I was managing a scholarship program, which was then the largest international scholarship program, privately funded in the world, which meant 2,500 scholars every year, going from 50 countries to another 50 countries. So I was working with the scholars, of course, but also with the volunteers who were nominating, the scholars. And that was really my first array in volunteer management, which is really all about engaging alumni. But in some ways, I was sitting on the other side of the fence, because I was not working with alumni directly. I was working with volunteers. We were lucky enough to have a community service, aspect of the scholarship, which the scholars had to do something pre and post scholarship, and possibly be involved, in the country where they were going to study. And that was an amazing tool of engagement for the local alumni who we had not reached out to yet, and the volunteers. And so from there, it was 7 amazing years for me. It was like getting another degree. This was the perfect segue to working in international alumni relations for a university. And I was approached by a former colleague of mine, and it's always someone who knows someone. It's the same in volunteer engagement. And when I started at U Chicago, there was no one focusing on international alumni relations, which was baffling to me. But at the same time, there were so many other areas in the US and in Canada and Mexico to focus on. But I was very lucky that Chicago had international campuses. At the time, it was London and Paris. And to have the expertise of the local people in terms of finding volunteer, and prospects for my colleagues. The reality is that at the time, phrasing at the time, we're talking about 2007, is that, the university thought they had 11 clubs that were active with names of volunteers. Everything was completely outdated. And we also realized that there were local volunteers we didn't know about. And there was about 100 events that were taking place during the year that we had no idea about. So I had to figure it out. It was very much a startup, which is what I enjoy doing. Figure it out, and with a lot of humility, because I had never worked for an institution like this, and this is very humbling, intimidating at some point, which is a good thing, because you always have to keep that in mind as you build relationship through the institution.
Yeah, you're such a hustler, from all of the different experiences you've had. Tell us about maybe. Okay, let me ask you a fun question. I know you've spent several years in international community engagement now. Which year did you take the maximum number of flights, and how many were those?
Oh God, that's probably, there are 2 years. 2010 for the University of Chicago, because I was part of the team that was creating the engagement structure for alumni for the opening of the center in Beijing. So I think I spent 52 nights at the Grand Hyatt Beijing that year. I knew everybody on staff, I can tell you that. I had no idea what my neighbors were, but it was a lot of traveling, not solely Beijing, but everywhere in South Asia, really, and East Asia. So I could not quantify the number of flights, because that includes, domestic flights. But I sort of was brought up on an airplane. My father was an airline pilot, so I love being on a plane. So people say, "Oh my God, I'm going to be on a plane for 17 hours." No, you don't understand. That's when nobody is bothering you. That's when you can sleep. So yeah.
Spoken like a true airlines child, I would say.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So for those of the, for those people in the audience today who probably have done some amount of work in international community engagement, but haven't really, I would say, dug deep, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's a good starting point, right? How would you, let's say someone's a director of alumni relations at a university right now, they're not really doing a lot from an international community perspective. What's the starting point? What should they think about? What are the baby steps here?
Well, I think that the most important thing is creating relationships across the organization. Worldwide, universities are siloed. It doesn't matter if it's a small university or a gigantic place, like Chicago. And that can be difficult. It's challenging, because you're the new person on board, and, you're starting to learn the culture of the place, which is really important, because you have to be able to talk about it, and that takes time. And so you have colleagues who do international relations, although it's not really their title, throughout, the Department of Social Science, so through the medical school or through the School of Public Policy. And so you basically have to create relationship with maybe 15 different people across a campus. And you have to make them understand, I am not a threat. I'm not trying to steal a prospect. I'm not trying to overshadow what you're doing. I want to help you, and in return, you can help me. And I can tell you at Chicago, it took about 4 years to really get to that level of comfort. I was, again, very lucky, although it was baptism by fire, that a few months after I started at Chicago was taking place the very first international alumni reunion. That was in London. The baby, so to speak, was given to me, and figure it out. And I think because I was new, it sort of worked. I'd know it didn't matter if I was talking to a dean. I just was not shy. And I think it's one of the main consideration and advice I would give to someone. Don't be shy with alumni, parents. Anyway, I'll come back to that. My boss at the time said, "Oh, we're lucky if we're getting, 150 people. We actually have over 400 alumni from 23 different countries." So that was the perfect platform for me to start to get to know them, and engage with them. So I think that the first baby step is create relationship across the board. Don't be shy, be persistent. Don't be afraid of nagging. Some of your colleagues are going to be incredibly flattered that you're asking for help, and I think that's something to realize. Always be humble. I can tell you that my first few months at the University of Chicago, again, I'd never worked for a university. I was in meetings where There were faculty and students and alumni and administrators. And I would leave meetings saying, oh my God, I was the dumbest person in that room, but it felt great. Because you're constantly lifted by the knowledge, and I think that's the beauty of working in higher education.
Yeah, it's great advice. I mean, be persistent, don't be shy, build relationships across campus. Talk to me a little bit about when it comes to international sort of community engagement, how do you think about building relationships with alumni versus current students versus parents, maybe alumni parents? Like, how do you sort of build relationships across the board?
Well, I think it really starts the moment a student is applying. A lot of universities have yield events to make sure we convince the best and brightest to join us. And it's not solely on, based on academic excellence. It's so, is this person going to be the best fit? Is this person going to thrive, in our school? So if you have the privilege of meeting the students, that means you're meeting the parents. And that's equally important. So this is where you start to engage people, because not only you meet the students, if you have the opportunity to, but you are working with local volunteers to try to organize events, and there was a time where we're doing in-person events, which might be very surprising to a lot of people. So we would organize these events, where it was the very first time we would meet the students, soon to be students, soon to be, enrolled, with us, but also the parents. And that creates a sense of community that is, unparalleled. You have to remember that, international students and then alumni are incredibly proud and feel very privileged most of the time to have been able to study abroad. It doesn't matter if you're of Austria and going to, Australia, or if you're an American going to Germany. So there's this level of pride that is immense, but that is multiplied, tenfold for the parents. They are so proud that their kid got into Chicago, Princeton, whichever. And they are your best PR, on site. And they are the best PR too, that the best person to engage alumni who might have been disengaged, or to help us with disgruntled alumni, who might tell you, well, you've never come here. We've been here for 40 years. I graduated 30 years ago. Where have you been? And actually, that's a big part of the job too, is figuring out the passion. Because if someone is disgruntled, that means they're very passionate about the school, or they're very passionate about the experience. How do you turn that into engagement? And there's always a possibility. I've never ever thought this is not possible. There's a way. So that's really when engagement starts. If you have the privilege of working for an institution that has a fairly big travel budget, go. There's no such thing as meeting people. That's where, that's the body language, and that's, common experiences, and you get to know about them. And, when people ask me what I do, I said, I build relationships, because I truly believe that, that's what it is. So this is not a job you can do if you're not willing to travel extensively. This is something you have to take in consideration. You're on the road. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, I was gone, every 4 weeks. It was the same thing at Princeton. At Chicago, I was done every 2 weeks. It's just, and a lot of people complain about it, but no, you have, make the best out of it. You're incredibly privileged, to do something like that.
Yeah. And I wanted to also sort of describe my own experience several years ago, when I actually, for a university that you worked for, I had applied for an MBA at the Booth School of Business at University of Chicago. And I remember having this distinct feeling of feeling connected to the university purely because they had sort of organized a roadshow in India where I could actually meet some of their alumni. And in fact, when I applied and got in through an interview process, and then an alum from Bangalore actually interviewed me, right? It's a different matter that I didn't go to Chicago Booth at that point, but I felt incredibly connected as a result of that connection that, the university was able to create, right? So, that the other side of the table here. I actually want to quickly also throw open a question for the audience. Beyond the two of us, there's plenty of people in the audience that I'm sure have done some work in international alumni and community engagement. If any of you have done some work in international engagement, if you wouldn't mind dropping just a line in terms of what are the things you've done, what have been the best experiences, what has worked, what has not worked. We can all learn from each other. So please feel free to drop comments while we continue the chat. And so Stephanie, you made an interesting point about sort of making the relationship with creating those relationships with parents and students, and then that being a like great PR for the university, abroad. What are sort of typically the outcomes? Let's say there's an alumni director today watching this session, right? And they are convinced that they should do more of this at the university. They now need to go make the case for, let's say a VP of advancement or whoever their boss is, to sort of expand the budget or expand the program from an international community engagement perspective. What are the outcomes that someone could typically expect, let's say in the first 1 to 3 years of doing this?
I think that within the first year, the outcome is the number of people you've been able to engage. Because again, the leader of the club, although this person might not have the title, may have been doing this for 10 years, and you need sort of fresh blood, because you need to keep in mind that you have to engage alumni across the board, across generations. And that is not always easy. But you have to, I'll come back to the word humility, because you have to meet people understanding that not everybody wants to go to an event. Not everybody is going to watch the Zoom presentation. Not everybody, is going to recommend a student, but someone might be incredibly passionate about, helping with internships or career opportunities. And again, people feel incredibly honored to be asked. And I think this is something to keep in mind. I think by default, we tend to think, oh no, well, this person is not going to help me. They're so busy. They're the CEO of this and that. But actually, they are willing to help. So I think within the first year, it's the number of people you've been able to engage. It's probably looking at roles, maybe the roles they've had are just antiquated because they are not in line with the needs of the institution and the cultural differences too. And start to work on that and ask their help for guidelines. What has worked, what hasn't worked. Bearing in mind, again, what's going to work in Bombay may not work in Bangalore. What works in Beijing may not work in Shanghai, and understanding why. Sometimes it's just a matter of personalities, and you just have to make it work. I usually say that in alumni relations, we're in the business of saying no, but. And how do you redirect that to something that is going to be equally, that would have equal passion from coming from the volunteers, but also is helping what you do and the university at large. So I think it's not, one of the most difficult thing in alumni relation is that it's very difficult to quantify results. It's not about raising money. It's always focused on the number of volunteers, focus on the number of new events, focus on the number of what we call unique participants. For example, you've had Joe Schmo, who had never come to an event before, and guess what? He's come 2 events in a row. That is really, really important to keep track of, because, a lot of universities measure engagement differently. For going for an event is more important than providing a scholarship. I don't believe in that. I believe everything is equally important, and I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, actually measuring alumni engagement is one of my favorite topics. We could go on for days talking about that. But let me actually bring in a couple of questions that the audience have asked. I think it's useful to get your advice on that, Stephanie. One is, so Gabriel Blackman asked, what would be the best advice for small private schools with low budgets to engage international alumni? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I'm going to come back to creating relationships. You would be amazed how much faculty do and administrators do internationally that you have no knowledge about. I mean, I've never worked at a school that keeps track of MOUs, So again, you have your colleagues around, across the departments, and your faculty. And one thing that I did at Chicago was to create a master calendar of who is going where. And, because we were in situations where, guess what, the president and the provost and faculty member were going to Beijing the same week. No one knew. And we look like, we look dumb, with alumni when they say, oh, I just met with, with so-and-so. So it's really taking advantage when you don't have a big travel budget of, who is traveling there, how can you engage them? Maybe it's a faculty member who just published a new book, and maybe they're doing a book tour, maybe not. And, how about building an event around that? And that's why the local alumni are going to be incredibly helpful, because you're not in charge, they are. And that matters to them. So I think it's really cross relationships, try to figure out who is going where. Sometimes it doesn't really align, with where you're trying to focus, where there's a need. And sometimes you have to manage volunteer, expectations too. I remember a club in Portugal, fabulous alumni, but asking me for a Nobel Prize, faculty member the second week of February. There's no way, I could pull that off. So again, how do you say no? But, I think that, so really, I think coming back to your question, Gabrielle, the best advice is try to figure out who's traveling where. And you can help them too. Maybe they're trying to connect with a person who's in publishing and you have a parent who's in publishing and, you can help them.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think the only thing I'd add also is, Gabriel, to think about what can you do online, if the budget doesn't allow for you to do in-person events. Can you maybe spawn or activate a few alumni who are popular in that particular region, to maybe become volunteers without spending too much of their time? And can you activate that online and maybe build up a little bit of a community online before you sort of, have the resources to be able to make the travel? I think that's a good place to start, I'd say.
And I want to add to that because, when we talk about engaging people from far away or locally, again, coming back to parents, but not solely parents, you have alumni who belong to, incredible organizations. I've worked very closely with YPO because I had alumni who were on the board or, we're going to all these events, and they are your lifeline, on site. And they might love to have a faculty member or to have an administrator, from your school participate to, some of their events. Again, no cost to you, amazing exposure. So that's something to keep in touch. There's always someone who knows someone who knows someone.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question from Anthony. Our college has campuses in other countries, Asia and South America. Curious as to how we could creatively engage and connect with alumni from those places. And maybe if you could share any personal anecdotes, Stephanie, from Asia or South America.
I think, again, building relationship with the administrators of the campuses, trying to figure out who they report to. I think that's really important because in some universities, you have provost or whatever the title is, vice president for global engagement. That's still something that is fairly new. That's been happening in the last 5 years. Try to figure out who they report to and who at the university level on campus can help you create that relationship. And again, these people, international campuses are going to be really happy that you're trying to help them with engaging alumni. Guess what? There might be the CEO, of, I don't know, I'm going to make this up, Renault, in France, who is a former alumni, has never been engaged, because he was not approached by the right people or because we just haven't made the effort. So again, it's about building relationships with the administration of, of the local sites. South America, I know, can be a challenge. But be persistent, ask them what they need. What do you need? How can I support you? I think it's really important to keep in mind that whether it's alumni, parents, or your colleagues in international campuses, we are there to serve them. It's not the other way around. We're there to help them. And, to the degree that we can. Again, if someone is asking you for a Nobel Prize, faculty member, that's a little more challenging. And I think that's the best advice I can give you. I don't know if it's helpful.
Makes sense. I also want to sort of just quickly point out that Joaquin Rafael actually shared what they've done at their school, and I also want to quickly, Stephanie, like since we're sort of getting towards the end here, one thing that I'm really interested in is, could you point out, maybe just based on your own anecdotes, and I'm hoping that this will get people in the audience excited about, taking up more, interest in international community engagement. What are maybe some unique experiences that you were able to sort of have as a result of sort of working on international engagement, maybe by different countries, maybe some anecdotes from your experiences that typically someone who's just working in alumni relations specifically for the community in the US may not get to have? Any stories you can share?
Well, so I think there are a few things that stuck with me. I think the first one took place in Chile. The University of Chicago is a very important name in Chile. It's Milton Friedman and his colleagues who built the structure of the Chilean economy, the only country in South America that has never been under recession. So that's interesting to figure this out. Of course, that took place under Pinochet, so not the brightest years. But in any event, the first trip to Santiago, through local alumni who had not been engaged, most of the time fairly young, we realized that one of the alums was the founder, CEO of the biggest press corporation in the country. And through him, we had all the doors open to us. That meant, having events organized at a local universities. Santiago is the city in the world that has the largest number of universities, which is amazing when you think of that. This is a country of intellectuals. So it was just having the local alumni make these connections and having all these doors open to us, and giving us opportunities that there was just so many that sometimes, we couldn't keep up. So again, it's building this incredible relationship and keep in touch with them. Even if, you change institution, these people might be very supportive of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I want to actually also, sorry, go on, Stephanie.
The second one is the opening of the center, the UChicago Center in Beijing, because that made us connect with alumni who had never been engaged with us, and building a very different structure of engagement, that was supporting real estate and law, and that was really amazing. That was a lot of work. For most of us, it took a year to recuperate, but that was amazing.
Yeah. I also want to ask, members of the audience, if they could share any fun idea to engage that they've been involved in terms of engaging their international alumni. I think it'll be fun to see, if anyone's done anything that's the others in the audience can learn from. And I'll also ask you that question, Stephanie. What are the most fun, international community engagement activities that you've done or seen?
So I'm going to come back to the opening of the campuses, but I think it's also fun to me was really being able to have faculty on site and to convince them to come with us. Again, they might know local alumni, or they're very interested to go to Taiwan. They've never been. And really convince them to come with us and make them understand, I am here to serve you. I'm not asking you to do much, but I'm here to serve you and have fun with you. If it's not fun, why are you doing it in the first place? So I think that fun ideas come in so many different shape or forms. When I was working closely with YPO, again, that was about having a faculty member, as a speaker, or maybe that was a super young alumni who was incredibly successful but didn't have the platform, to have this kind of audience, and that was a lot of fun. And especially with young alumni, you think, well, nobody's going to help me, they don't know me. Well, again, you'd be amazed.
Yeah. And one of the things that really struck me when we were chatting earlier, Stephanie, was sort of your genuine empathy, for international community members. You spoke about this instance where, international students coming into the university, and it was their first Thanksgiving, and none of them had a real sort of attachment to Thanksgiving, but they were obviously alone while the rest of the locals were celebrating. Tell us that story. I thought that was really it shows empathy you had.
Yeah, for me, it's you have to remember that for international parents, you're the lifeline. Their kid might not respond to email, might not respond to text, because guess what? It's the first time they're outside of the house, and they're kind of happy not to be in touch all the time, or they're just so busy that, it's not one of their priorities. I was meeting with international students, weekly when I was on campus. And yes, Thanksgiving is a good example. When I was at Chicago, or even more so at Princeton, there were so many students who didn't have family or friends, to go to, and I was hosting Thanksgiving at my house. And I think it was even more fun for me than it was for them. That was a really fun thing to do. The other thing too is, when we were opening the center in Beijing for UChicago, guess what? None of us spoke Mandarin. Okay, not surprising right there. And it was 2 weeks before students came back to campus, and I recruited current students to be our help on the side. They were staffing the events the way we were staffing. They felt so honored, and we felt saved that we had people who culturally could speak the language and help us relate to things. So be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's actually a great place to, end this conversation, although I'd love to keep going. I think for me, the big takeaway is having the empathy understanding that each culture and the people coming from there are different, and acknowledging that difference and just trying to learn that, right? Being bold, not be sort of disenchanted by some of the comments from elsewhere on campus, and really keep at it. So these are the sort of the key takeaways for me, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, Stephanie. I hope we've been able to inspire a few people in the audience, to be able to do more work in the international community engagement side. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know how busy you are, so I appreciate you taking the time to do this with us.
You're very welcome. We could do another series where we talk about all the other opportunities. There's so much to do, and 99% of it is really fun. So embrace it as much as you can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us as well. We're going to end the broadcast now, but feel free to leave comments on LinkedIn, and Stephanie and I are on LinkedIn as well, and we'll reply to those comments if we weren't able to answer it here during the live
Don't
session.
be shy.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kalyan, for the opportunity.